I'm one of the two acting co-directors of the Multicultural Community Center, as well as on the planning committee for B4, which is again building belonging at Berkeley and beyond, a presentation of the Division of Equity and Inclusion. I want to offer a quick self-description. I am a Filipino-American non-binary person in my early 30s. I have shoulder-length black hair with some bleached bits at the ends. I'm wearing a blue denim shirt over a black cotton t-shirt. I also want to share some accessibility notes. We have the chat disabled for folks. We'll share a little bit later on about our tool that we're going to be using to communicate and share resources out in lieu of the chat. We also have interpretation and captioning available on the session. So once again, this is B4 dialogue series, the building belonging at Berkeley and beyond. I want to begin us with a land acknowledgement before we begin our session today. So UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. And the statement was prepared in collaboration between Native American Student Development and the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. In this spirit, I also invite you all to continue deepening your understanding of the fact that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun by checking out aloneland.berkeley.edu, where Native American Student Development has compiled resources, including more info on land acknowledgements and info on the Muwekma Ohlone today. I'm going to pass it now to our Vice Chancellor of Equity and Inclusion, Dania Matos, who will do some grounding for our session today. Dania?
Thank you so much, Antman, and thank you to our organizers, interpreters, and all of you for being here. My name is Dania Matos. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm the Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion, and it's an honor to welcome you here. Envisioning this a year ago, I can't believe we are in our second year already of its conception, and increasingly to build beyond belonging at Berkeley and beyond. Try saying that 3 times really fast, or B4, which is why we call it that. It was really grounded in the vision of the framework of critical consciousness by Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, really thinking about an active and persistent curiosity and awareness that examines beliefs, practices, assumptions, and norms to detect how power and privilege operate to contribute to inequity and oppression. That really was the concept behind us. And for us, it's really about this concept of belonging. As you know, the Othering and Belonging Institute here defines it as belonging, or being fully human, means more than just being seen or having access. It really entails having a meaningful voice and the opportunity to participate in the design of social and cultural structure. It means being respected at a basic level that includes the right to co-create and make demands upon society. I wanted this series and B4 to be just that for all of you, a space where the topic and speakers could spark that active and curiosity belief of examining how privilege and oppression encounter in the everyday life that we have and our intersecting identities. B4 builds belonging by illuminating and uplifting our intersectionality and moving us from the individual to the collective, moving us from one individual holding knowledge to the collective wisdom of us all, and in that countering white supremacy. The topic for today, Disability Justice Part 2, is really grounded in October being Disability Awareness and Employment Month. Having this dialogue really is an opportunity to strengthen our sense of community and visibilize disability justice work even more. So once again, I thank you for being here. Our disabled student population has increased 158% in 8 years. and over 20% of our faculty, staff, and students self-report as disabled people. 5,000 students are registered with DSP, 36% of whom are also folks from our BIPOC communities. We, as faculty, staff, and students, keep advocating for disability justice, inheriting that struggle and advocacy for on-campus forebears who sparked the movement in the 1960s. Thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you, Dania, for that grounding. I'm really excited to introduce our moderator for today's conversation, Martha Velasquez. Martha Velasquez is the interim director of the Disabled Students Program. Martha Velasquez will be introducing our speakers and moderating our conversation today. So I'll hand it over to Martha.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to share the space with you today. My name is Martha Velasquez. I'm currently the interim director for the Disabled Students Program. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I have short black hair, glasses, and a blue top on. I identify as being Latina female. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ann Kwong.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to the B4 folks, and also for all of you in attendance for letting me share space with everyone here today as well. It's my honor and privilege. My name is Wai-Yee Kwong, she, her pronouns, and I'm currently the coordinator of our Disability Cultural Community Center, which is a relatively new space on campus, thanks to the activism and advocacy of disabled students, faculty, and staff community. I'm currently calling in or joining from my home office. I am wearing a black and white dress with a white blazer and black collar, and identify as a proud blind Chinese American professional.
Thank you, Anne. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ben Perez.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Perez. I use the he, him pronouns. I'm the manager of architectural access compliance with the Office for Disability Access and Compliance at UC Berkeley. I am a light-skinned male with short brown hair that needs a haircut. So if you can imagine it being just slightly on the not good side of shabby. I'm wearing black glasses and a blue shirt with white and yellow lines. I am a wheelchair user and alumni from Cal, and am really thrilled to be a part of the B4 series, and with this conversation in particular. It's absolutely a pleasure. And it's great to see so many familiar faces in the crowd.
Thank you, Ben. And our last speaker, Carolyn Swalina.
Hi there, I'm Carolyn Swalina, and I'm thankful to be invited to join in the conversation today and also to be part of this community. I use she series pronouns. I'm a middle-aged white woman with long brown hair that's becoming more gray by the moment, but I don't think that shows up on Zoom yet. I am wearing a pink shirt with white flowers on it, and I am currently the acting assistant director for accommodation services at the Disabled Students Program, and I'm also one of our lead disability specialists and a supervisor of our disability specialist team. And again, I'm really glad to be able to join everybody here today. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. Before we move forward, thank you all for being here. I want to introduce that we're going to add into the chat. This is Mariana, I use she and they pronouns, and I'm the interim associate director for violence prevention at the Path to Care Center and a confidential employee. I'm just adding into the chat Padlet, which is going to be a shared resource where you can utilize resources during the event today, the discussion. If you have questions, you're welcome to add questions to the Padlet directly or email them to buildingbelonging@berkeley.edu. And Martha, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So we will now get started with our first question. This first question is going to be for all of our panelists, but I will start off with Ben. So Ben, how and from where do you enter today's conversation? And this could be from your position or role in your department, team, or office, or your disposition towards today's topic.
Great, thank you. And I should say, I fidget a lot. So if you see me bouncing around my camera screen, that's just kind of what comes with my territory. It's a part of what I bring to this conversation. So I'm coming to this conversation, I'm really grateful that the university is, and specifically E&I, has created a spot for this conversation to happen at all. Disability justice is a really, like any justice conversation, it's involved, it's complicated, it is multifaceted. And it's something that will, by its nature, never be a complete conversation. So it's great to be a part of it as it evolves. I come to the topic as a wheelchair user who is one of very few wheelchair users whose expertise is specifically in accessibility in the built environment. And what I mean by that is that, for the longest time as a wheelchair user, I really did not understand what it meant to have an accessible space. I knew what it meant for it to be usable by me as an individual, but over my time as a member of the Berkeley staff and in my work on the campus, I've become broadly recognized as an expert about architectural access, both internally to the campus and externally. And I come with this really profound desire to make compliance happen meaningfully. And I know that that isn't justice. And I think that's actually kind of what makes this conversation interesting to me personally, because compliance is really difficult when it comes to building things that are accessible, when cost is such a big force in those conversations. And also I come really hoping personally to help build expertise in disabled people, whether they're wheelchair users or not, about what access means in the built environment, because I think it is infrequently completely understood. So I'm really, looking forward to that conversation. It's pretty common for me that I'm one of the only disabled people in the space that I'm working in. So it's really great to have this conversation with other people who I know identify as disabled and work with disability, both. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Ben. Carolyn, same question. Oh, I think you're muted.
So technology is always a learning curve for me. That will happen multiple times today, I'm sure. Thank you. So I'm, I guess, coming from multiple pathways, and definitely disability justice is very close to my heart, to my professional goals, to my personal goals. I'm currently working within the Disabled Students Program, where a large part of my work is training and supporting our disability specialist team, in addition to working directly with our disabled students, helping to identify accommodations that are needed for their equal access, as well as helping students to self-advocate, to better understand their disability identities and disability histories. Some of the students we work with have lifelong disability identities, some have recent disability identities, some have both, since we can have multiple disability identities. So part of my job is helping students to be self-empowered and to advocate through the university. I've been involved in student services on campus for about the last 17 years as a professional. Before that, I was a graduate student in the joint doctoral program in special education. And for me, understanding disability and disability justice and my own disability history was really an ongoing part of my development. When I was in graduate school, initially working on my master's, it was shortly after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And I found myself advocating for students quite a bit, for students who didn't have access to assessment or access to disability services. And having left that, I went to Berkeley with the intention of finding ways to assess more students so we could get everybody accommodations. And over time in my studies, it dawned on me and I became more aware that really what we need to do is remove all these barriers so that we don't need accommodations. We really need to look at where the barriers lie. And it wasn't in the individual with a disability. It was largely in the built environment and the politics and in the laws and the structures. So for me, that was an awakening that I've carried forward in my work in student services, as well as in my own experiences. So while I did not have any accommodations as an undergraduate or graduate student, part of that was because I didn't know, for instance, that migraines or mild hearing loss could be disabilities. And as an employee, I do have some workplace accommodations around those that just allow me some additional flexibility so that I can fully do the work that I do. So for me, disability justice has been something of a journey that I've gone through in both my education and my professional work, and that I continue to travel on, as well as my experience within my own identity. And again, I'm really excited to be part of this conversation and to continue to grow and learn with everyone here.
Thank you, Carolyn. Anne?
Thank you, first of all, to my co-panelists for so candidly and authentically sharing your stories. I'm also going to step back a little bit here and share a little bit of my roots to better situate where I'm coming from in terms of what I'm bringing into this conversation. So similar to Ben, I also am an alum of Cal. And during my childhood, I first grew up and spent the first 8 years of my life in Hong Kong, where there was no Americans with Disabilities Act, and educational opportunities for disabled folks, including myself, who identify as blind, is quite limited. After we came to the United States, although there was more opportunities, disability history and collective activism is still largely not included in high school curriculum. So by the time I came to Berkeley and started my undergraduate journey, I, as a first generation college student as well, was quite lost, felt a little overwhelmed, and had a little bit of an imposter syndrome. And I think that was important and still remains very important for me personally. And that's the feeling I carry with me, thinking to how now as a coordinator of a disability-centered space, how our cultural center can really work with students who carry different roots, different experiences, and multiple identities with them. How can our space work together to collectively create disability wealth and also be a safe space and a social space for disabled students to connect, and also create room for faculty and staff to build that larger disability community wealth community. So I think for me, there's a lot of personal alignment of what I hope to bring into this conversation, along with my history and personal journey of disability discovery.
Thank you. And so for our next question, this will be for both Anne and Carolyn. So with these conversations grounding in Paulo Freire's Conscientização, sorry for its Portuguese, what terms, inspirations, and systems are vital for you to name to engage in this dialogue on practicing and building belonging? And I will start with Anne.
Thank you. And I think thank you again also, Danya, for putting that grounding into the conversation as we first began with our conversation today. And I think with critical consciousness and that awareness is that first piece, right? As I briefly shared earlier with my own disability journey and history, if I didn't know what are my rights as a disabled person, as a student, as a staff, what are my responsibilities and what are the university or the system's responsibility in providing supports or accommodations, then it would be quite difficult for me to be successful, to thrive, to really focus on my academics, because a lot of my emotional labor would be spent and energy would be used finding out who can I ask to help me navigate and become more aware of my own rights and responsibilities as a disabled person on campus. That's why it's really important to have that disability community wisdom. Find elders who can help me navigate or help students navigate the institutional structure, because sometimes power dynamics make it very difficult to advocate for what one person needs. For instance, and I'll just use my own self as an example, if I needed alternative media, which is books and materials in a digital format in order for me to access it, but I didn't know that I need to first sign up for disabled students program services as a student, or that digital books existed in the first place, and that's an accommodation I'm entitled to, then I wouldn't be able to access those books in the first place. So I think it's critically important for not only students to be aware, but also people in positions of power to be aware that they have a responsibility when a student or a staff make these requests. Another term I feel like is very relevant in what we're discussing here today in building belonging is really that social cultural capital, right? Not only knowing about the nuts and bolts of what are my rights, what's the Americans with Disabilities Act, but also how to find community on campus, how to find those social networks, and to be able to find mentors and disability elder who can pass on and share some of that institutional knowledge. And finally, I think keeping in mind again that there are lots of ecological factors at play, whether it be students or staff, working with your professors or working with supervisors to be able to get what you need. And sometimes the professors and the faculty and staff might be interested and curious in supporting you, but the broader macro system, a whole database that's commonly used might not be accessible, or a web portal that a staff needs to use might not be accessible. So I think keeping all of those framings in mind when discussing belonging, when discussing disability, is quite vital and important.
Thank you, Anne. Carolyn, same question. And you're on mute.
We'll just repeat this for every question I'm a part of, and thank you for accessible technologies. But I was just stating my complete agreement with the areas that Anne raised and addressed. I think some of the things that I was looking at within this question, certainly within Freire, that idea of a problem posing, education as opposed to a banking one. So helping to guide students with disabilities and all students to really reflect on the contexts in which they're moving, barriers in which they encounter, to think about what's most important and what structures and supports they may need in order to help move them towards what's most important, I think is part of the work that I do. I think also when I was thinking about terms and I think a lot of if it's under anything, it's under a big umbrella of philosophy. So I know I used to teach in a teacher credentialing program a while back, teaching a class on inclusion that both general educators and education specialists needed to take in order to get their credentials. And it was an accelerated class. It met for 10 weeks. And some of the instructors, particularly those who weren't intending to be special education teachers, were a little bit resistant sometimes about taking the class. This wasn't really what they had planned for. And I found that in 10 weeks, I could certainly look at strategies, but if we hadn't addressed the underlying philosophy that was happening, an instructor could learn the strategies and not use them. So it was really important to help to contextualize the disability experience, to help educators understand that it wasn't just a legal step that they needed to take to have their classrooms be inclusive, but also a moral and socially just stance to take, that they should be including and supporting the growth of all students in their classes. So some of that involves needing to shift practices of philosophy within the campus. There's still often medical model approaches that really focus on fixing students with disabilities or seeing students with disabilities, as being within the classroom and needing extra assistance, rather than looking at the environment in which we're asking students with disabilities to engage and seeing what are the barriers in the environment, what are the structures that we have within Berkeley's culture that aren't necessarily inclusive to students who aren't proceeding from the center of everybody in a normative curve, who may be proceeding in ways that the majority of their peers may not. I think the most common accommodation that we implement is extended time for exams. And when we think about how much grading curves and timed exams are part of Berkeley's culture, but can also serve as a barrier for many of our students who may need some additional time or who may benefit from working together with one another in a classroom where everybody can succeed. So Berkeley's culture does have a lot of power within the bureaucracy. Faculty have a lot of power within that structure. I think kind of naming those areas as areas that we can support in creating change so that those areas really do engage in more inclusive practices is important. And I think too, as Anne pointed out, the importance of students understanding how the structures that exist work, even if it's something as direct as transitioning from the laws that cover students in K-12 settings to the laws that cover students in universities. Those are very different laws that have very different implications as to what accommodations can be granted. In short, the K-12 laws focus on success, even if they modify students' goals. And in college, everybody is expected to achieve the same goal, and the focus is on access. And not every student transitioning to university has the resources at their prior school to help give them the power to navigate that and to do so with agency and to do so with advocacy. So I think that also is something that can be named as we're looking at belonging and access. But I think all of that really falls underneath that overarching umbrella of philosophy. And how do we shift the philosophy on campus to truly be inclusive and to truly value disability as one of the many facets of diversity that truly need to be valued and included on campus.
Thank you, Anne and Carolyn. Well, with that said, and with the past 2.5 years under our belt, now coming up on 3 years, this question is both for Ben and Carolyn, but what has campus's COVID response taught us about the possibilities and limits of accommodations and the circuits and systems of power that grant them? And I'll start with Ben.
So thank you. That's a really challenging question, because I think one of the fundamental realities of the institutional culture at UC Berkeley is of decentralized decision-making. So in my experience, although we have a lot of centralized power structures that exist, we tend to ask and allow individual units to control a lot of how they operate based on the realities that they face on the ground and the preferences of the administrators working, in that space. COVID asked a really tricky thing of the campus, which was to take 150 years of education as delivered in a location and upend it in a matter of weeks, days. Time is not a thing that sticks the way it used to. So I don't even remember what happened exactly at that moment. But I do want to really, point out that there was this moment right at the beginning of the question around remote delivery of services from the campus where we just changed all of that. We told everyone to get out of their buildings. We said, you no longer have control of those spaces. We said, your labs are not yours, they're ours. When I say ours, the university had to step in and dictate terms in places that we traditionally have not allowed. And it was a really painful time, I think, for so many of us, for so many different reasons, but it did show something really interesting to me. And that was that the campus is capable of making broad and sweeping decisions around how we do things, why we do things, when and where. And traditionally, those conversations have been viewed as kind of an electric third rail. You can't really dictate terms at that, in that way, at the level of an individual unit. And, I thought about it in a way, quite aside from the actual terror that I think a lot of us, myself at the very least, that I experienced as somebody who was actually coming to campus in early April 2020. So a couple of weeks after the pandemic conditions were really brought out. It made me think about the possibilities of using central coordination to meaningfully look at improving the experience of disabled people, students, staff, faculty, guests, and visitors through central coordination, because it was possible in a way that I think hadn't been viewed as possible before. Unfortunately, that centralized power, although it can definitely come with, it's the same kind of circuit and system of centralized power that creates really oppressive outcomes, or can create oppressive outcomes. It also creates, creates that opportunity. Now, the campus, I think, is a very, we're a traditionalist institution, and as COVID falls increasingly in the rearview mirror, although clearly it's not gone yet, we're doing this on Zoom right now, and I think that should be a testament to how much actually did change. The campus is trying to pivot back to a space where things feel and operate the way that they have for the preceding 150 years. And COVID, especially for disability, it showed us that we can do remote work in a way that allowed us to contribute equally as members of our teams. It showed students that remote delivery of education was possible, and that opened the door for people who might not have otherwise applied for university, given their concerns about their ability to be somewhere physically, on time and ready to learn. And so I think it showed us a really interesting possible future. And now the tension is about how much of that future is happening and when. So I think really COVID just asks us a lot of really tough questions that I'm really hoping we can delve into deeper, and we can examine the way that we've done what we do moving forward. I think it's an opportunity as much as it was a challenge in 2020, it is an opportunity in 2022.
Thank you, Ben. And Carolyn, same question.
I have unmuted on my first try. Thank you. I agree with Ben. I think, again, this brings me back to some of my concern around philosophy, or around the belief of the need to be inclusive. I do think that we learned a lot of lessons. I do think that we spent a lot of time before COVID being told that we couldn't work remotely, that this couldn't happen, that people wouldn't be able, not only students, staff, faculty wouldn't be able to work unless they were on site. And we found that that wasn't the case. And that those kinds of administrative mandates that came really quickly, as Ben described, allowed other administrators and other faculty to make some of those changes that we were told before wouldn't be possible. The move to remote did create greater access for many students with disabilities. For students whose disabilities make it a challenge when they're flaring to leave their homes or to attend class in person, being able to attend class remotely really allowed them to continue participating without falling behind during times when they were best able to participate. Being able to take exams online from the comfort of one's home, or whichever setting one found comfort in, really also created a lot of additional access for students who were able to control their testing environments. And I think, especially in the very beginning, I think there was a certain amount of camaraderie as instructors and students and faculty and staff. We were all navigating this place we hadn't been before during a time of crisis together. And I think that there was a certain amount of grace that was given across the board as we kind of tried to find our ways and to make this happen remotely at the time. But there were also barriers too that came up with the pivot to remote instruction. As we know, some of our students didn't have access to the same technological resources that they might need in order to equally participate in their programs. Some of our students were in shared living spaces. Some of our students were in unsafe living spaces if they left the campus, and that often impacted their ability to engage. Some of our students really benefit from the structures of proctoring offices and didn't have spaces that were so structured for them to participate. Is also true for many of our students, particularly those students who left the area while we were remote. Many of them lost some access to medical care and lost access to therapy. And, some therapists are only licensed to practice in California. And when students left, they couldn't receive remote services from therapists. Some students, didn't have access to medication that they need. Certainly, a lot of students just simply didn't have access to the same community that really they were thriving in at UC Berkeley at the time that we pivoted to remote. And now that we're returning, there's kinds of pluses and minuses there as well for our students. For many of our students, they're really coming back and feeling very confident about the way that they're coming back. For others, some of our students are just starting to learn in person over this last semester, so after having started remotely, and there's a very large transition there for students as well. So I think that the COVID taught us a lot of flexibility. However, there's a lot of that flexibility now that some are placing COVID in the rearview mirror. Not all. There are many of our students who are still significantly impacted. Some of those lessons aren't now being implemented. Now that it feels like more people feel comfortable being on campus, those who still have access concerns to returning are not being focused on the way they were at the beginning of the pandemic. So I do work with students who would really like to see us carry some of these lessons that allowed them to participate remotely forward. We know that we have the tools to do that. We know we have the ability to do that. We can structure curriculum to do that. But there's definitely a greater focus, I think, on returning students than not, that a lot of our disability community is being impacted by.
Yeah, just to add a little bit there, I personally, I think COVID created a couple of interesting circumstances for me as an individual that were challenging because of a whole host of different things. So for example, months and months on campus, I was the only person in a very large building. And I kept thinking to myself, well, one, if there was an emergency, I'm a wheelchair user, I'm on the 6th floor of a seismically dubious, shall we say, building. And I kept thinking, what happens in that context as an individual? And then, at the same time, I often tell people that, I have ADHD. It's my non-obvious disability. They see my wheelchair and they say, oh, well, that's got to be the biggest concern in your life, or at least I imagine they say that. And by far, ADHD has a bigger impact on my day-to-day experiences of work and life. And, Zoom is terrible for somebody with ADHD, in my opinion. It's taking all of the information of the people and the body language and all of the things that I really thrive on, and it puts you all in little squares. And, several hours of little people in little squares is a real challenge for me. But at the same token, it means that on days when I would maybe otherwise have called out sick, I can stay home and do a meaningful day's work because I can do it from there. And so I think those types of situations are playing out over and over again across our staff experience as well. And, we have different units who are more or less willing to embrace some of that change or possibility.
And I think too, building on that, one of the, I don't want to say lost opportunities, because we can still do this. One of the opportunities not yet realized is the opportunity to really reflect on what we've been going through and what applies and what doesn't. There was definitely a very celebratory tone to coming back, and we were serenaded through music videos. We were given social events. But I haven't seen surveys, for instance, of how many of our staff members and students and faculty have had COVID, how many are currently navigating long COVID, how many lost people close to them due to COVID, what aspects of our remote, learning do people most want to carry forward? What struggles did people have? We've had a few pulse surveys, but we haven't really had anything in that depth that can really allow us, one, to reflect back on the really huge impact that COVID has had and continues to have on our students and our staff and our faculty, our community, and how we can build from that in order to be more inclusive. I just think that information hasn't been collected. I haven't been surveyed about that. I don't know that folks have been. I can say in DSP, we are seeing increasing students, and I expect this will continue, who do have long COVID, who do need accommodations, who are new to a disability identity. Some of them, this is an additional disability identity, but some of them, this is the first disability identity that they've been aware of and have needed accommodation for. And that's certainly happening with our staff and with our faculty, but at this time, we don't have that information available. And I think, again, I'll call that an unrealized opportunity. I don't think it's lost because we can still do it. And I think that would give us a good place to move forward from.
Thank you. So you might have answered this a little bit, but I'd like to hear Anne's thoughts on how could we reconfigure campus and shift climate and culture to foster the critical dialogues required to dismantle ableism.
Yeah, absolutely. And 100% symbols on what Carolyn and Ben have already alluded to. And it's really, again, reframing and reimagining what is possible rather than retrofitting what we know may not work. Really reframing that mindset of, okay, compliance is great, doing the minimal is great, but there's so much more we could do to go beyond that and to provide a holistic community. There are still stories of folks, whether it be staff or students with disabilities in different fields or units, who are afraid to share publicly their disability identity. And until we create a space where folks don't have to, quote, hide their disability identity and that they can authentically be themselves, I think there's still more opportunities and work we can collectively do to co-create and reimagine. And one additional example to that is even just reframing. Sometimes folks with disabilities face that microaggression of, you don't look disabled, or, oh, you don't really need that, or environmental barriers to access. Creating events where there are not captioning immediately provided, or not digital flyers or alt text, that can cause a lot of emotional labor for disabled folks to feel like they don't belong, that they're not welcomed. And maybe it was not the intention of event organizers, but I think there needs to be a lot more conversation, like Carolyn and Ben have shared, about continuing to grow as a culture, to shift toward the direction of reimagining and creating that belonging. Again, it's easier to legislate paper, but it is much more difficult, but much more meaningful to figure out how to change folks' hearts and minds.
Thanks,
So-
Anne. Yeah, Ben, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so to further that, I think one of the things that I really like to focus on is the idea of lowering barriers, not just for disabled people, but for the people who are doing work to support access in their programs. So I think this is especially true in the built environment when I talk about buildings and physical spaces, but it's also true in web, and it can be true in terms of setting up accommodations or accessible elements for an event like this one. Doing disability things right, that is to say, providing access, is a technical area of work that requires some expertise, either in the person doing that setup or in evaluating spaces or programs or other things for accessibility. I think about web accessibility as a great as a great example of this, where it just requires a bunch of technical expertise on both disability and on how websites and web content works, is developed, and is implemented. And so recognizing that technical expertise isn't something that every person who works on websites across, for example, our campus has, or really, can have. How do we get the people who are doing that work into a place where they're comfortable requesting the assistance, getting technical expertise, and implementing that technical expertise? We don't all need to be experts in something for us as a campus community to create, an environment that allows that expertise to come forward quickly and effectively when it's required. So yes, I really, when I think about what do we do to dismantle ableism, I think it's just at least for me, partially a recognition that doesn't necessarily mean everybody is an expert in access for an event or a building or a site, but that they understand that their lack of knowledge is something that can be supported, and we can still provide access even if they don't individually know what the next step is or how to go about it. I don't pretend to be a web access expert, but I know people who are, and I know how to connect with those people if I have to develop new content for the web. And so I think that relationship is one that's really important. And then when that's done well, for example, at a public event, if somebody says, I do need an accommodation to participate in the event, the person putting the event on feels empowered to say, excellent, let's get that done, instead of it becoming something terrifying for that individual to try and, not because they're malicious, but because they don't know what the next step is, just to make sure that they feel empowered to then provide it, or to at least work through it.
Thank you. So Carolyn, in the context of this conversation and in your work and personal lives, what does it mean, or would it mean to thrive?
So I think thriving means a lot of things across a lot of different settings, and that COVID has made a number of those things challenging. Certainly personally, being able to engage with my friends and my family is a really important part of my thriving. As I mentioned, I've been on campus as a professional for over 17 years now. So a lot of the friends I have over the years are folks who I know through the workplace, and we've all come up together. And right now, I'm at higher risk of complications if I have COVID. So I don't eat indoors at restaurants. All those little things I took for granted before the pandemic, are things that's now waiting for things to improve to have those back again. My immediate family is also on the East Coast, so being able to travel safely has been compromised by COVID. But those are things that I'm looking forward to. Having space that's my own is an important part of my thriving, and spaces, I'm an introvert. I manage anxiety. So having space and time away, since most of the work that I do is very person-centered and very being able to have time away from all that to disconnect is really important for my psychological and my physical well-being. It's also important for me to have flexibility in my work and some agency over things like my schedule, as I mentioned in terms of workplace accommodations, being able to have things like, a somewhat flexible arrival time if I'm having significant symptoms that would impact my driving in the morning, can be really important. Without that, I would have difficulty performing well at my job, or I would need to take multiple days off. So having a workplace that's understanding of my need for accommodation and doesn't make that a barrier for me helps me to feel appreciated and able to thrive. I think also, personally, I'm also, politically active and very interested in supporting things like voter registration. So being able to find meaningful work, both within the work that I do at the university, as well as within my personal life. It's important for me to be able to remove barriers and to be engaged and to try to create access as I can in as many different areas. So I think for me, thriving, being able to, again, in terms of managing my disability, it's really important to me that my work have meaning. It would be really easy to disconnect on the days that are rough for me if it didn't, but because it does, that helps to support my engagement. So again, for thriving, it would be, access to my community and participation in my community, as well as support and access, and feeling valued within my workspaces support my thriving.
Thank you. And what it mean, or does it mean to thrive?
Well, I love that question. And I think Carolyn did a fantastic job sharing that there are different definitions of thriving. What it means to thrive to one person may not be the same definition as another. And I think to take a step back and what it means for me personally to thrive is that it's okay for people to have different definitions. Oftentimes, at least for me, even within the disability space, oftentimes we talk about disability independent living. And sometimes culturally, that's not always, people don't assign the same value to it as others. And so I think being okay with the fact that thriving means different things to different folks is something that's important for me, and having the campus recognize that that's also the same for students and other colleagues who work here. The second is really, for me personally in this position, having really informative, valuable conversations and sharing space with folks who are from the disability community, but also allies who are interested in learning more is very meaningful to me personally. Being able to co-create spaces where we can talk and exchange best practices to learn from each other. I'm always reminded of the fact that I have a lot of learning to do from all of the intersectional work and dialogue and partnerships that I'm trying to and hoping to and continuing to build, and being humble to that fact. And also hoping to have the necessary resources from the campus, whether it be support in staff or resources in terms of funding. DSP and the disability community on campus is growing. There's a lot more diversity in terms of staff and disabled students who are joining and are part of our campus community. So making sure that there is both funding and staffing to support those needs in order for me to be able to create community for students and really truly embody that culture of belonging, I need to have the support to be able to do that. So I think those are some of the areas in which, for me personally, thriving would mean.
Thank you. Ben, what does it mean for you?
I think, and thank you to Anne and Carolyn for providing that context. It gave me time to think. I'm very grateful for that. I think personally thriving, for me, thriving is watching the campus grow and learn. What's great about being a part of an institution like UC Berkeley is the way that it feels bigger than yourself. And, we have an opportunity to help shape the future generations of leaders in the state and around the world by the virtue of this institution's position as a top tier world-class research entity. What can be really frustrating is trying to get an institution that feels like it has such a large weight to respond when you feel like something needs to change. So for me, thriving is watching the institution grow and learn, even if it's in fits and starts, and even if it's not as painless as it could be if they just listened. And then, so that's I think is really important to me. And then, I realized I said that was personally, that was much more professionally. I think personally, it is finding out what the end of COVID means for how we work with each other. As I alluded to before, I'm a very much in-person kind of person who has absolutely relished and really appreciated the opportunities that I've had to not have to be in person all the time. As a disabled person and disabled member of the staff whose position doesn't always allow me to say, oh, it's 5 p.m., time to stop what I'm doing. I've really been grateful for that, for that flexibility. So, finding out what that means for us all moving forward, getting the tools in place to connect, to make hybrid meetings really possible, for example, and really seamless. That's what I think it means to thrive for me. For us to figure that out as a collective, and then maybe other institutions will follow suit, but at least for this institution to do that work.
Thank you. And how would the collective aims of a campus university centered on thriving be shaped if we valued and centered autonomy and self-determination?
Thank you for that question. I think really understanding and supporting the whole person. Going back to all of our previous conversations thus far about belonging, about philosophy, and really thinking of people as individuals with different, again, roots, needs, supports, and also strengths and contributions that they're bringing in. Oftentimes, from my own experience, I feel like disability is framed in such a negative way on campus. When we talk about disability, it's more the sometimes fear of, I don't want to say something wrong or do something wrong. Or the other reaction might be, oh, what are the additional things I need to do or technical expertise now I need to acquire in order to provide access? And for me, I think if we were to think about thriving and focusing on all of the individual wisdom as well as community wisdom that folks have and are bringing in, really reframing that whole conversation and that philosophy, as Carolyn has shared, into one of strength and positivity and reimagining all the opportunities rather than all of the limitations when we think about disability or around how to create access.
Ben, what are your thoughts?
I unmuted myself before I started speaking. Yeah, I think I really hope that people can how do I say this well? Disability is a result of your environment as much as it is a result of somebody's individual functional limitations. So what we expect of people across our campus community shapes the disabilities that they have. If, in the case of students, high stakes testing creates test anxiety. And you don't need to evaluate. That isn't even the most effective evaluative tool of somebody's absorption of academic material as a part of their participation in academic programming. So, I work in the built environment, and I, recently have spent a lot of time on some projects saying things like, could we have fewer stairs as central visual architectural features of your conceptual rendering, right? There's nothing more hostile to a wheelchair user than like stairs all everywhere. They're interesting architectural elements, lots of little facets, and they render very prettily, but it portrays a type of hostility inadvertently. I mean, stairs are requirements. You need to have exit stairs. I get it. Elevators don't work during fires for good reason. But just to have the campus as an institution and as the individuals doing work here, understand and own that our expectations on people shape what becomes a disability. And so if we can reframe some of our expectations, we can actually remove disabling conditions from, you know, the functional limitation exists, but it's not disabling if it's not expected that you do it. Disability is inherent to all of us. All of us will be disabled before we leave this planet, or we will leave the planet very soon. And those are your options, functionally, morbid as it is. So understanding the ways in which this is you too, and everybody that we work with, I think that's really what I hope for the campus, to think about how we can think about individual self-determination and autonomy and what it means to thrive. We all play a part in disabling each other. So what can we do to stop that?
It's really quick to follow up, Ben. You work a lot with policy and laws. Why do you feel people are so opposed to making those changes, or why we want to default to going back to things when we saw so much flexibility? And when we know that it mean more people would be thriving.
Yeah, the ADA is 32 years old this year. We have members of our campus community who've been, let alone staff, tenured faculty longer than the period of time that civil rights protections at the federal level have existed for disabled people. I think there's a lot of change happening here, and change is scary and it's hard. And we're snapping back rigidly to our pre-COVID mindsets for the same reason. COVID forced institutions like UC Berkeley to undergo a decade of change in like 2 weeks. And I didn't think it was even possible before I saw it happening around me. I don't know about any of my other panelists, but anyone in the space at all. It was. So I think that it's really change resistance more than anything. And ironically, academia as a discipline is a pretty change resistant one, despite its tendency to drudge up and require change of society beyond the spaces where that research is happening. And so, I think it's really just, fear of the unknown. But with COVID, the cat's out of the bag, right? We can deliver instruction remotely. I don't care what anybody says. We did it. We did it for 2 years. We can have remote work executed successfully. I got busier during the pandemic, not the other way around. And so whether it was all well, I guess what I'm trying to say, we can absolutely change. And what I think is, it's just a challenge to, require people who are already doing a lot and doing a lot of complicated work to embrace more different new, on top of trying to, feel their sense of self and feel their own sense of thriving when their sense of thriving was established before disability was a consideration. So dialogue is how we change it.
And Carolyn, the same last question: how would the collective aims of a campus community centered on thriving be shaped if we valued and centered autonomy and self-determination?
And I think my thoughts on that build on both Anne's and Ben's responses. I appreciate when Anne was talking about thriving, the point of how thriving is different for everyone. And I know I've been part of, discussions and committee meetings where there have been questions like, how do we support students thriving at Berkeley? That hasn't taken the initial step of defining, well, what is thriving and who are Berkeley students and quite how does that work? And I think if we're looking at the overall Berkeley community, we need to ask those questions of students, of staff, of faculty throughout. What does thriving mean? What do we need to thrive? There can be multiple pathways to thriving, which means that there are also multiple ways that we can do things. And some of that also comes from the dialogue, that Ben is mentioning. I think we would definitely, when it comes to any individual stakeholder within the bureaucracy that is Berkeley, understanding what it is that makes people thrive. So are there, what are the thoughts of staff, of students, of faculty? We would make individuals' experience more visible than it has been, so that thriving is more complicated in our discussions. Because again, some students really have been thriving, not setting foot on campus at all, and some students have been suffering, not being able to be on campus, and are now thriving, coming back, and every point in between, you know, we're experiencing with students and with staff and with faculty. I think when we're looking at how flexible instruction really can be, and we've learned that that instruction can be more flexible than it traditionally has been, how do we create collaboration within faculty to make that happen? And how do we get faculty to collaborate with staff? And how do we get faculty to hear students' voices? I think we all need to hear each other a lot more and see this as a collective problem, but a collective scenario that we all find ourselves in right now. And how do we move through this in the best way possible for all of us? And that means talking across positionality, that means talking across identities, that means talking across and through and around and within the bureaucracies that exist at Berkeley to make these kinds of things happen. And I always go back to philosophy, because again, I learned early on in my prior work that you can teach all the skills, but if people don't believe that that's the right thing to do, it's not going to get done. And if you can teach people and have people understand and share what's important for all of us, then we'll find the things we need to make that happen when it's important to our hearts, to our minds, to our philosophies, to our spirits, to engage in that for access. So I think it really, it's around the dialogue and the communication that Ben was describing, both to really complicate that nature of thriving, as Anne had pointed out, and then see how do we all work together to move forward, and maybe forward and sideways and backward and forward twice more. And it might not be a straight line, and it probably won't be. But how do we work together on that journey to really create a space, a university, a culture, a community, in which we're all included, in which we all really can authentically thrive.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts, and you know, around these really important questions. I do want to, we have some questions from some of our participants, and I just want to remind that we are using Padlet, and I don't know if we can link that again if there's questions coming through. One of the questions is, if we upend the very framework of higher education, what would you love to see reimagined? And this is, I'm thinking about Carolyn's point about how grade schools goals for all to succeed versus universities goals for all to meet a specific standard. And I'll open this to all the panelists. But maybe Carolyn, we can start with you, since your thoughts sparked that question.
So I'm sure that hours from now, I'm going to say, oh, this is really what I think. And I'm thinking as I'm talking. I apologize for any circuity in my response. I think it's when we're looking at the standards, I think that's one of the things when I think about the faculty component, for instance, is being able to name what the standards are. I think often we don't do that, and therefore we don't understand whether we're doing something because it's the way that things have always been done, or we're doing something because it gets us towards meeting the goal that we have. And while it's different in the university level, there are standards that need to be upheld, so that a Berkeley degree means a Berkeley degree, or a class means you accomplished a particular thing. We still don't, as a university, articulate, in my view, frequently enough, exactly what the goals are of a course, or of a particular program outcome, or a pedagogical practice. If we can upend things a bit, part of what we do is proceed from those goals. So we would come together to agree upon the goals, and then work together to determine how those goals can be met. And I think that would open up a lot of multiple pathways for meeting those goals in a much more inclusive way than we currently are engaging in. But ask me that in 3 hours, or when I wake up in the middle of the night with an epiphany, and I'll have a much better answer, but that's me on the spot.
Any thoughts, Anne or Ben?
Go ahead, Anne, if you have something.
Sure. I definitely agree, and being flexible with how people get there. Oftentimes, I agree with you, Carolyn. The meaning of the end point may not be clear, but the pathway of how you're supposed to get there, we've outlined for you.
Mm.
So you need to take all these turns, go straight, make a left, and go right. Whereas the goal of where the outcome might be is unclear. I'm not sure why. Here are all these middle steps, right? And so maybe perhaps being more flexible with how folks achieve. So an example is maybe if a class is to learn language, is a point of learning language having shared meaning so that the two folks who are in dialogue can understand each other? Or is the purpose of learning how to write out by strokes, spell out, use a specific keyboard, right? What is our outcome? And can we be flexible with what tools, methodologies people use to achieve that outcome?
What are your thoughts, Ben?
Yeah, I love the idea of hypothetical radical transformation, because it's an opportunity to ask yourselves what does an institution like this one do really, really well, and what could we just pretend never happened? No, I'm just kidding. What can we move past completely? Or at least try to. And I think I use high stakes testing as an example a lot because I think it caused the most panic in me as a student when I was a student here, and is clearly the space where I learned pretty much the least. I don't remember much of anything from courses. It's been increasingly, 10 to 15 years, depending on which course we're talking about. So recognizing that, I wish that we had a way of structuring relationships with the campus that were more inclusive. That is to say, allowing our staff to participate in academic growth as a part of their personal relationship with the campus, allowing our students to learn and work and do more for the administration of the university, and allowing our faculty to plan and engage with both of those questions as well. So if I could just throw it all out, I would say, what if you were a member of the Berkeley family and we just allowed you to engage with all of the things we do? That would be the best, that would be my happiest thing, because I think then our goals are more clear. Our goals are the growth and development of members of the campus community across all spectra of their life. And whether that means meeting a threshold to get a degree, or having a job and an income that allows you to have housing and a place to live, or doing work in a space that really makes you feel like you're making a difference for an important public institution. I would love to see a campus that focused on those goals, because this has been a place of hugely, in my opinion, there are problematic things that UC Berkeley and other institutions like it have done, but I am really a strong believer in the transformative and positive ultimate effect of this institution. And so I'd love to see more of it with a little less rigidity.
So here's another question. Are there any toolkits or things to consider guide for supervisors who oversee students to ensure our workflow, processes, protocols, and structures are inclusive of neurodiversity? This individual would like to help their students develop strategies that help them with their unique working learning styles to take them past graduation. Carolyn, I know that you work a lot. Do you have any thoughts on or ideas or toolkits?
I think in terms of resources, I often recommend the Job Accommodation Network, which is at askjan.org. I believe it's askjan.org, which is a database where you can look up a particular disability and see what impacts of that disability there may be in the workplace, as well as what accommodations might be appropriate. I tend to share this with students. Many of our students are applying for their first jobs as they're nearing graduation and trying to think about, now that they know that there have been accommodations or even structures at the the university that worked so well they didn't need accommodations, how do they self-advocate in the workplace? And I find that using Ask Jan can help students to develop language in order to self-advocate. We also do have a career counselor in the Career Center, Ricardo Flores, who works specifically with our students with disabilities and can help students to navigate things like disclosure of disability identity and how to self-advocate in the workplace. There isn't, to my knowledge, a specific things to consider guide, although I think that would be potentially a good area to collaborate on. And I think looking at Ask Jan can probably generate a lot of questions and materials around that, but there's not a specific guide like that, to my knowledge, at the university itself. There's also the Be Well at Work office on campus, which handles workplace accommodations. And they do provide some pointers around accessibility in the workplace, and also can be consulted in terms of collaborating or seeking guidance around accessible workplaces. But I think this also, it can be a challenging space for supervisors because there are protections. You shouldn't be asking your staff directly what their disabilities are. But if staff are, requesting workplace accommodations, you can certainly work within mentorship of Be Well at Work. And also, I think you can ask all staff, again, that question. Let's ask that in all of our spaces. What would it take for you to thrive in this workspace? And I think that's a great question to ask of all staff, regardless of disability identity. And that can also help to shape your workplace culture and practices. Although I can imagine if folks are interested in this topic, that there's also the possibility of developing working groups and discussions around that too, as there often are at Cal.
We do have another question, and I'm going to guide this one towards Ben. So what's your recommendation for making events accessible and balancing the technical resources funds that might be required to do this? For events, we don't have closed captioning and other resources as a default, but ask in the registration form if someone requires additional resources in order to participate fully. What's your recommendation for making events accessible and balancing? Oh, it's the same question, sorry.
No worries. You can ask the question a million times and it still might come up with different answers. No, I think, as I mentioned before, lowering the barriers to making it possible for somebody to both request accommodations and for the people delivering the accommodations to make that happen, I think are really critical. I want to shout out to Derek Coates, who I saw in the audience earlier. He's a colleague of mine who works on program accommodations in our office and who is really the expert and point of contact on these things. But if your promotional materials have the language that you just suggested in them, you're really truly on the right path, because it tells a disabled person who wants to come to your event or participate in a Zoom about, for your event, that you have thought at all about the possibility that you might need to provide accommodations. And that is, at least in my experience, the most important first step. As you're thinking about events that are either in hybrid form or are, in person specifically, things can get a little more tricky. I don't expect you to necessarily, as an event planner, I don't know who you is in this case, so the general you, to know exactly whether your restroom is perfectly accessible or not, but you should have a general sense as to whether there's that international symbol for accessibility, the wheelchair on one of the geometric symbols. In case you were wondering, that's what it's called. It's not just the handicap symbol, it's the international symbol for accessibility. If the restroom has that on it and looks like there's an accessible stall somewhere in there, you're on the right track, and having that general knowledge is really helpful. Making sure that you know that the campus can support you. Depending on the nature of your event, there might be the ability for the campus to help pay for interpreting or captioning for the event. Just making sure you know that those things exist, and most importantly, to just embrace a question about specific accommodations for something you're putting together openly, with humility, which is to say, if you don't have an answer, to accept that you don't have an answer and to tell them that, and then to go find the answer. And then finally, to just learn as much as you have the capacity to do so. And if all you learn is I need to go call somebody when I have a question about accommodations, that's fine. But if you want to learn more, then doing so, I think, is also really helpful. And I wish that we were at a spot where captioning and interpreting, for example, were so ubiquitous that we just had them for every event always. And for a disability themed event, I think it makes total sense to make sure that they are present with or without a request for accommodations, but that it's also okay to not have them if they're not needed. Because the interpreters and captioners I know tend to be pretty busy. I'm speaking about people who are also doing work right now, so my apologies and thank you for what you're doing. But you know, we want to make sure that interpreters and captioners are available where they're needed. And if it's not at your event, that's okay, as long as you gave everybody an opportunity to request those accommodations if they are needed.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank all of our panelists again. I'm going to turn it over to Antman to kind of close this up for us.
Yes, thank you, Martha. Thank you, Ben, Anne, and Carolyn so much for all that you shared today. This is Antman speaking again. I'm really moved by how animated this conversation was in the pluralism of what thriving can mean on this campus, as well as really illustrating the wealth of disability community and wisdom on this campus. I'm really excited by the work that you all are doing and just having this conversation and sharing it with us today. Mariana will be sharing a post-event survey in the chat. It'd be helpful for us as B4 planners and the planning committee to take in your feedback about this session, to share what you were learning, hoping to get out of this, and what you did get out of this for us to plan our future events. So again, if you could direct your attention to the chat, Mariana has sent the link. It's also available on the Padlet that was shared earlier. Your feedback is so helpful. And once again, thank you to all of our moderator, our panelists, to Dania for our opening welcome, as well as everyone here for participating and listening in our conversation. Thank you for joining B4.